It's hard to believe that I had this plane up at 11,500 feet, flying up above the cloud deck, smooth, calm air, nice and cool temperatures, and now I'm down on the ground, sun shining, a little bit hot and sticky. It's just a different world up above the clouds.
Chicago Center, Aero 10 Tango. We may need to climb up to 11,000 to clear some clouds in front of us.
Oh, perfect. I love that. No traffic, but yeah, thanks for the heads up.
You're welcome. 10 Tango.
I can tell you that this is going to be the most detailed review of the Piper PA-28R-180 Aero that you will find. In this video, we're going to cover all aspects of the plane, starting from a brief history about the Piper Arrow, going on to the exterior and design of it, talking about the landing gear, including some information about that interesting automatic landing gear system, and then we're going to take a closer look at the engine and propeller, check out the interior, and of course we have to take a look at the avionics. There's a full Garmin glass panel with the latest autopilot and other advanced features in it. We're going to have a review of the performance and the specifications of the plane, and we're going to do a comparison between two other popular complex airplanes, the Mooney M20C and the Cessna Cardinal RG. And of course, we've got to do our signature flight portion, the startup, taxi, takeoff. We're going to climb, cruise at over 11,000 feet, and then do our descent and landing. When you want to fly fast and do it economically, you go out and you look for a complex airplane with retractable gear and a constant speed prop. There's one complex airplane out there that was actually designed to make it easy for pilots to transition from the fixed gear over to retractable gear. It's an easy to fly plane, it's easy to land, it's got a low maintenance cost and low cost to own, as well as having an overall good performance. And this one is it. Some people call this a gear-up Cherokee, but it's not exactly just a retractable gear version of the Cherokee. The Cherokee has an 0360 carbureted 180 horsepower engine and fixed pitch prop. This has the IO 360 fuel-injected 180 horsepower with a constant speed prop. So even though they're both 180 horsepower engines, the Cherokee with its fixed pitch prop at the static RPM can only produce 135 horsepower. This plane is a friendly, economical, reliable, and easy to fly plane, yet it's still a complex plane. They even went so far in making the design safer and easier to fly that they created an automatic landing gear. It's a feature that's not available in other similar planes. The Aero was designed for pilots as an easy step to get into the complex aircraft. It's simple and easy to fly and easy to control, but it has features to help the pilot along the way. Now, since there's a number of different models made throughout the years, in this video we're going to be focused on the first Aero model that was manufactured from 1967 to 1971. And that way we can go and do some detailed videos of those other Aero models in the future. Now, this airplane is for sale. You'll find the link to the details in the description below. In the late 1960s to 70s, there was an increased demand for the complex singles. Mooney dominated the market at that time. Beech did have their Musketeer, and there was the Rockwell Commander and the Cessna Cardinal RG. But when Piper entered the market with the Aero, none of the others could compete between the Mooneys and the Aeros. And actually, in the first 2 years alone, there was over 1,100 Aeros sold. Let's travel back to June 8, 1967. That's when the Aero first received its certification. All-metal, complex airplane with a 30-foot Hershey Bar Wing. So even fits into small hangars. And let's take a comparison. That Mooney M20C and Cardinal RG, 36-foot wingspan. So this is 6 feet shorter overall. But the wing area, it's 160 square feet, which means low wing loading and better slow flight characteristics. The stall speed on this is actually only 53 knots when in the landing configuration. So take a look at this wing and see just why is it called the Hershey Bar Wing. Well, if you look at it from top down, you can easily see it's a nice rectangular shape, almost squared out. It looks like a Hershey's candy bar. That's why they call it that. I'm going to take a look at the flaps. These are actually a manual flap system. It's got a Johnson bar in the middle. I've got my helper inside to help with the Johnson bar demonstration. So we're going to do first set of flaps is 10 degrees. Then we've got the second set, which is 25. And the third set, which is 40. And you can see just how far down they go, and that's why it's got such a slow stall speed of 53 knots. When it's all the way down, you've got nice heavy flaps. It helps it float right along the runway for landing. Back here we've got our stabilator. It is the fully operating tail. This is found in the Cessna Cardinal, some other planes like that. And if you see here, this is moving separate from it. This is actually your trim. It's got an electric trim as well as a trim wheel down the side. You want to trim it up. You can see the entire length of it is moving as she's trimming the trim wheel. It's adjusting the pitch. Nice effective controls. So the baggage door is latched with the key. Secure that before flight, but you want to open it up. You've got a little clip here that you flip up and over to hold it in place. Right here you'll see one of the key components. This is a 200-pound baggage limit. A lot of the planes like that RG and others, Mooney's 120 pounds in the back, but this is 17 cubic feet of capacity, so tons of space, goes all the way up to the top, a really large space as well as a really heavy weight load that's available to it. And then also just the interior, again, what I was saying, that those finishing touches, all you do is you pull back on this and you're able to get in and access the battery compartment as well as your hydraulic fluid reservoir, which you're not going to be able to get easy access. Most of the planes you've got to put the screws, take all of those out in order to take out and get into the back area where the batteries and stuff are. The location of the fuel tanks on this wing are a little bit out from the center, gives them a longer arm, so they need to be switched properly during flight. And especially when you've got the autopilot engaged, you need to be less than 10 gallons off from one side to the other. So inside on the left corner, I'll show you there's a left and a right indicator. We don't have a both option on this one, so you do need to switch it while you're in flight. But the nice thing is that the G3X has indicators on it for both the left and the right tank. It's very precise on the fuel quantity, so you can monitor it, switch it whenever you need to, and of course it has an alarm on there too, so it actually tells you, reminds you to switch the tank. So even if you forget, the electronics are going to remind you. When you're doing the switch, we've got the electric fuel pump, and that's actually used as a backup to the engine-driven fuel pump in both the takeoff and the landing, as well as when you're switching tanks from one to the other. That auxiliary pump is kind of a nice option for the emergency if the engine-driven pumps failed. Down here up front, there's a couple of things I want to show you. First off is going to be the landing light. So you can see it's got an LED system on here, and there are multiple benefits to having an LED landing light. The first one being that it's got a low current draw, so you can have it on whenever you want without worrying about having that extra amps drawing on the battery and the system. But the other thing is just how bright it is, because when you are in low visibility conditions at night or even in the middle of the day, if you're coming and landing in, if you put that light on, you're going to get a lot of attention so everybody around you can see where you are in the pattern or on landing. You want to flip it on for me? You see just how bright it is, and even, like I said, in the daylight you can see that. You'll see that on our landing video. You can pick the plane out of the sky because of having that light on. Alright, thank you. Now I mentioned that this was going to be the most detailed review of the Aero 180, and I want to be true to my word, so please bear with me as I delve into this gear system a little more. The Aero gear system is simple. It is electrically driven hydraulic power pack. The Piper Aztec, by contrast, is an engine-driven hydraulic pump, while the Piper Comanche has a direct electrical gear. The Aero's gear is hydraulically operated by an electrically powered reversible pump that's controlled by the gear selector switch on the panel. And the hydraulic pressure actually holds the gear up. So there's no up locks like you're going to find on some of the aircraft. And that landing gear retraction or extension only takes about 7 seconds. I like this design because if you have a leak in the system and you lose your hydraulic fluid pressure, you know that the gear is automatically going to just drop down and you can lock it in place. There's some aircraft models actually, where if you lose hydraulic oil, you can't even put the gear down and you have no choice but to do a gear up landing. On top of that, the early Aeros had a special feature called an automatic landing gear. The retractable landing gear in general has caused many accidents throughout aviation, and there's many times that pilots forget to put the gear down. The Aero was actually designed to make it easy and safe. It's got a secondary pitot tube on the left side of the fuselage that's used as a sensor for the automatic landing gear. It detects both airspeed and propeller slipstream. So the idea behind this, because if we take a look at the location here, you can see it's kind of in a goofy spot where normally a pitot tube shouldn't be, because you're not getting just the air for the airspeed, you're also getting the prop wash coming back. So it's a combination of those two things that'll activate that automatic gear system. What it does is the system is designed to prevent that gear retraction too early, and then if the airspeed falls below 104 miles per hour with the power that's pulled all the way off, then the landing gear also automatically extends, and that prevents the gear up landings. So to prevent a premature gear retraction, it'll stay down until about 85 miles per hour with full power, and that's why the location of that pitot tube is important, because it can detect that based on the prop wash and the amount of prop wash that it's getting along with the airspeed, and that's the combination that I talked about to detect when it should use that automatic gear system. Now, the automatic gear system does have an override switch that the pilot can use in certain circumstances. According to accident data, there's actually one accident only that was reported that was related to this gear system. And even in that one, the pilot was not completely forthcoming about the situation, so ultimately it was pilot error. Also, there's actually only one gear up landing to a stop reported, which, that's got to be a record for retractable gear airplanes, and it's a tribute to this automatic gear extension system that's on many of these Aeros. There is an important feature, that gear override, that does need to be understood by pilots that are flying a Piper Arrow with this, because even though it's a thoughtfully designed concept, the pilots really need to be aware that there are some concerns in some scenarios where you need to be able to use that override system effectively. One of them is in a high-altitude airport with a takeoff, because you have a slow airspeed, so the gear can't retract when you normally would, because you can't get the proper speed up at that higher altitude airport. So then what happens is that gear down creates additional drag, so then you can't get your speed up either, you can't get your altitude up. So there was a pilot that couldn't get his airspeed up to do the gear retraction, and instead of using the override feature, he did the worst possible thing by pushing the mixture full in to try to get more power. Well, you know what happens when you do that, especially when you've already had it leaned out for high altitude? He completely lost his climb and he crashed the plane. What he should have done is use the override switch, retracted the gear in order to be able to increase his altitude and his airspeed until it was safe enough to let go of that override switch. The second scenario to consider is, say, an IFR descent. Especially in cold weather, you can have ice buildup on that pitot tube, and it can cause the gear to come down prematurely and without expectation. So the problem with that is that you've got to just be aware that you could have a little bit of icing in the clouds, and make sure you turn the pitot heat on, because the normal pitot heat works on that external secondary pitot tube as well, and make sure you apply that in the right time during flight if you think you might be going into an icing situation. So you can see that it is designed with some options available to the pilots, but the pilot really needs to know what it is and what options there are and how to use them in order to avoid causing any issues with the system. The emergency gear procedure on the Piper Arrow is also really easy, really simple. All you have to do is use the lever in between the seats. It's an easy to access location, and that lever releases the built-up hydraulic pressure to allow the gear to free fall. And then they also mentioned in there that if you want to fishtail with the rudder, just to make sure that those main gears are locked down and in place, that's all it is. It's really simple, like I said. On other planes, what you've got to do is you've got a hand pump or a crank or whatever it is 40, 50 times or more to get the gear to go down and locked. And it's really not an easy thing to do in an emergency. Like I said, Piper just made it easy and simple. One of the other things with this gear system on the Piper is that most single-engine airplanes have one gear indicator. It's gear down and locked, or it's not. The Aero has 3 separate indicators to show that each individual gear is down and locked independently. That way, if you've got an issue with it, you know which particular gear isn't locked in place. Now we get to one comment or question that a lot of people have, and that's the wing spar. So a little bit of background about it for the Pipers anyway. On April 4th of 2018, there was an accident in Florida that involved a Piper PA-28R-180 that was owned by Embry-Riddle Aeronautics, the university down there. And so that was a different model than this one. What happened was there was metal fatigue cracking that had been associated with the flight training maneuvers that it was constantly being put through, and the frequent landing cycles. Because obviously with these gear being mounted on the wing like it is, when they get down for landing, if you do bounces on your landing, you're going to be putting a lot of pressure up and down on the wing that's going to carry through this bar. You're going to have metal fatigue there. But realistically, the original proposition for it, applicability, was somewhere around, I think, like 20,000 Pipers were going to be covered. I think it got narrowed down to about 11,000 after they adjusted their criteria, because it's based on a few different details. You actually have to review the logbook and the different entries on it and see how many times it was through 100-hour inspections for flight schools and stuff like that. And this one was never through flight school or anything like that. But it has had that wing spar AD test. So it's an eddy current inspection, and you'd get a result, something like this. There's a report that shows you the left and right main wing spar and whether it's accepted or rejected. And obviously this one was accepted on it. You just get these repair station reports, and then that gets sent into the FAA. Now you can actually see that type of wing spar AD on many different types of airplanes. You just have to really make sure that the AD applies to the plane that you're looking at, and then check and see whether the inspection has been done. So the original prop that comes on the Piper Arrows is actually a 2-blade Hartzell HC prop. This here is actually a very expensive upgrade to the Hartzell HC-C3YR. Some advantages to having the 3-blade prop, obviously, is that it not only looks nicer, it has better ground clearance, and then when you go up to climb, you get better climb performance, and it's also quieter in flight. On the other hand, in cruise, it does have about 2 knots slower than having a 2-blade prop. But the 2-blade prop, being a little bit faster in cruise, has a slower climb rate. So there's advantages and disadvantages both ways, but this nice expensive prop is definitely a nice upgrade to have on here. I want to take you into the engine section next, and one of the things I want to show you is just how easy it is to get into the engine, because it's as simple as making turn of 4 screws. There's 2 on each side, lifting the latches up and out of the way. You do the same thing on the other side, and then you literally pop it up and out. So the engine on this Piper Arrow is actually a Lycoming IO360 B1E, a fuel-injected 180 horsepower with a TBO of 2,000 hours. The later models were upgraded to the IO360 C1C 200 horsepower engine, but the early C1Cs actually had a TBO of only 1,200 hours, and that was only increased to 2,000 hours later on. This particular setup is a 12-volt system with a 60-amp alternator, and then the maximum load at night, even with all these radios and avionics on, is only about 30 amps. The nice thing about the G3X is that it displays the voltage, it displays the amps on there, and then that digital engine monitor, you can see in here when we come up close, is all of the probes. So it's actually got separate individual probes throughout. The EGT probes are down here, the individual CHT probes coming throughout. So it's really nice setup. You can see the cylinders, temps, and the exhaust gas temps individually. Taking a look at the other components to the engine, we've got the Lycoming factory cylinders on here. Overall clean condition. Fuel injected, like I said, so a little bit different. When we were looking at the front cowling earlier, you could see that there wasn't actually an air filter. A lot of them have the air filter up front. You can get bugs and other things like that. But if you see the hole here, this is actually your air filter intake, and it's got a nice large hose that runs over here to the bracket air filter. So there's advantages by not having the filter being clogged up as much by bugs and other debris coming into it, but the disadvantage is that the air is warmer entering into which theoretically, my understanding would be is that it would potentially have a little bit lower performance having the warm air. Kind of go around, check everything else out on it. You can see the condition of all the different components, the different wires running through the different areas. For the digital engine monitor are all of these white cables throughout it. And then some of the other upgrades include a oil filter adapter in here, so you can see that that's on there. Those are definitely better for grabbing out particulates and things like that running through the engine oil. The one thing that you don't see anywhere on here is actually a vacuum pump. Because it is a full digital glass panel, there is actually no vacuum systems, so that's actually been removed out of here. So when the overhaul was done on here, is actually done through Penyan, which is one of the top few companies for engine overhauls. Let's take a look at the interior of this Piper Arrow. There's a few neat features I want to show you. First off being this nice little insert in the glass on this side. You've got it below 120 knots, you can pop it open, but it's especially nice when you're down on the ground. You can pop it open and then put this out there, and it gives you a nice airflow even from the prop when you're sitting waiting for your clearance or whatever, so that you get a little bit cooler in here without overheating. Taking a look at the rest of the glass, everything is in really nice shape. They've got this little darker shade piece here to keep the sun off of you from the angle, so that's kind of a nice feature to have. The finishing, if you just look through everything when it was redone on the interior, everything is the leather. It's got armrests, it's got pockets throughout everywhere that you can put stuff in. Down here you've got your fuel selector, left and right tank, very easy to access for the pilot. These are the vents. You can adjust the location that they're blowing to and how far open they are. It's got notched connections in there. And then just taking a look at the carpet, you can see everything is stitched up. It's very clean condition overall, fit just perfect to make sure that it sits in there exactly where it's supposed to be. And just take a look at the attention to detail. Everything is labeled. You've got your flap-around handle, your flap handle here that we have, the manual Johnson bar. You can pop it up for your flaps. And then over here is your emergency gear level. So we talked about the emergency gear operation. This is when you have your emergency if the gear isn't working. You push this lever down to the bottom. It releases a hydraulic pressure, drops those gear down so you can fishtail lock them in place. So really simple, easy place to access and do that while you're flying. You've got your trim wheel here, and it is electric trim, which is up on the pilot's yoke here. Your up and down trim switch, very easy to access, but if you don't like to use that, if for whatever reason that goes out, you've got the backup manual option. And since we're speaking of trim, I do want to just swing back up front here and show you it also has a nose trim wheel, so you can adjust it here, and that helps you with your direction for your nose, so it's kind of nice to have that. Again, talking about the finishing touches on the pockets and everything, even underneath the front seat, you've got pockets to keep your little checklists in. Makes it really nice to access whatever you need while you're in flight. You've got nice kind of a gray leather two-tone seats. The seat belts are even labeled Piper. If we pull this forward, you can access into the back. We've got some mounts here for putting pockets and everything behind the seat, multiple pouches in there, pockets available, as well as the main pocket here. We've got the POH. Taking a look in the back, those vents again are available here to adjust the direction and the amount of air coming in while you're in flight. The rear seat has that two-tone leather available. It's got the stitching on there for the Piper Arrow on the back headrest area, which is really a nice little touch to it. And the rear seats, it is a bench across, but it's got a little bit of a dip in there for each side, so it makes it comfortable for the passengers to sit. It is a 4-place intercom system, and that's available on the sides there. You can see we've got the connections here. And then just kind of taking a look around, you can see the condition of the headliner and the plastics overall. A couple of minor spots where there's a little bit of cracks in it, but really very, very minor. You've got up top here your light as well as your speaker. These are LED lights here. They can adjust and turn, so they can be used for either the front or the back seats. When you flip them on, you've got red and white, so if you're using it at night for the panel light up, you can flip it to the red option. So again, just kind of all of those little things that make this nice and polished and finished. Coming back up front here, we take a look. We've got sun visors, and they are the semi-see-through. We do have a power setting table on here, but if you look at this one, you can see when you're flying, you can see through it. So here's your flap handle, the Johnson bar manual flaps. You pull it up. First notch is 10, second notch is 25, third notch almost up and down is 40. Very easy to distinguish which setting you're in based on where it's located. So now it's finally time to take a look at this full glass panel on this Piper Arrow. If you take a look at just how clean it is and the level of detail that was put into putting this together, not only all of the information and stickers, but the integration of everything. So first off, over here to the left, we've got a Garmin G5, and this has that backup battery installed, so even if you were to lose all power, you still have this to fly on for the time being, and it has everything in there. It's got your airspeed indicator, it's got your altitude, it also has your VSI, your turn and bank coordinator, your directional. Everything is available on this G5. You can use it as your backup to your primary. This is directly interconnected with the G3X. Now the G3X comes in two sizes, a 7-inch and this larger 10.6-inch version. So this bigger version gives you a ton of screen space to show everything, and it is primary, including primary engine gauges on this side. And when you click on here, you're able to go in and see your volts, your amps, you can do your fuel calculations, enter in your quantity of fuel, reset the gallons used. All the other information is available over there. You've got your manifold pressure, your RPMs, your gallons per hour fuel flow, oil pressure, oil temperature, CHTs, EGTs, and then also your fuel on both tanks independently, so you can see and keep it within that 10 gallon range when you're flying with the autopilot. And then finally the fuel pressure, so you know if you have any issues with your fuel pump in flight, your engine driven one, you can throw on the backup fuel pump. This is directly connected, like I said, so when we're changing something here like the density altitude and using your barometer here, it's automatically updating over here at the same time. So you can do it either direction. It goes both ways. You can do this way and then it pops up over here. So like I said, completely interconnected. Other of the features on here that are interconnected are your comm and your nav. So your primary nav comm is obviously your Garmin 650. Your secondary nav comm is your panel here, and it's got your comm 1, comm 2, so it tells you that, but you can dial both of the frequencies in either over here or over here on the 650, and they go back and forth super simple. Now the transponder is right here, and it's actually a 345 in and out transponder, but you dial in your squawk code and update it right here and enter it. You can do your ident, everything, because the transponder is actually remotely mounted in this plane. This is your secondary navcom radio, so you can dial the frequencies in from here, or you can go in down here and you can put it in to the unit. Also in the center, you've got obviously all of your airspeed indicator, altitude, you've got your VSI, you've got your heading indicator, your inclinometer, and you've also got here your little warning lights. So your oil pressure, voltage, obviously, because we are running it on the ground without the engine running, but also your gear indicator. So it shows you in here that your gear is down and locked, and when the gear is up, it'll show in here as well. And also when you've got your autopilot running, it's going to show up in this little indication box up here what setting you're using on your autopilot, whether it's a heading indicator or through the VOR, what type of altitude hold you're using. Everything is right here, center screen for the left pilot flying. Finally, over here you have your map, and you can adjust your distance, it's got your flight track. Everything is available, fed directly from the Garmin 650. You can also spin over here. You've got a weather page. When it's getting from the 345, you have your radar weather showing. So all this information right in front of you on your screen. Center stack, again, all Garmin. You've got a Garmin GMA 350 audio panel. We've got Bluetooth option on here. The phone, music, everything can be connected through this. You select which nav you're using, which comm you're using, which one the mic is playing on. Speaker, you can do pilot separate. You can have pilot and co-pilot active and isolate the passengers. All different options. You've got the speaker for using if you don't have your headset on for whatever reason. Then we go down here, Garmin GTN 650, top of the line, one of the latest options out there, the most popular. You've got a 750, which is a little bit bigger, but other than that, this one is the most popular. You've got all of the features available in here, from doing flight plans, procedures, waypoint information, airport information, navigation, traffic. Everything is available right here on this, and whatever you put into this automatically gets fed over back to your G3X. Secondary radios, also a Garmin unit, and it's both a nav and a comm option, so you can put the frequencies in from here. They'll show up on the G3X. You can enter the frequencies in on the G3X, and then they'll go back and show up on here. Everything, again, fully interconnected. You've got your G500 autopilot. This is one of the latest top-of-the-line autopilot systems. So many different options. Flight directors included. You've got heading. You can follow your track. You've got your navs. You can do everything with that. You've got your altitude, and you can do altitude pre-selects. You've got indicated airspeed, or even going all the way up to being able to do from your vertical speed, and you can preset how high or how fast you want to climb and use this system. Very, very easy to use, and again, all completely interconnected. Everything you input on here is going to show up on the G3X. This is an iPad Pro. You see it's the larger sized screen, not an iPad mini. You've got the option of putting different apps on here. Obviously this is the ForeFlight app, so everything is easily identifiable, shows up on this. You've got your backup synthetic vision on here, all of your speeds and everything available, track, heading, everything. So this is basically like a backup option for the right-hand pilot to use when they're flying. It's right in front of them. The other nice thing is that this has a Garmin Connect system. So the Garmin Connect, what it is that you're able to put in you've got apps on the tablet. You basically use that information. You can do your pre-flighting, you can do your pre-planning, get your flight plan entered into your app on your tablet. Even while you're at home, sitting in the comfort of your house, when you get out to the plane, using that Garmin Connect system, you can feed it over into the Garmin panel, be able to update it on the 650 and thereby on the G3X. So it's just a few buttons and a few commands to get everything uploaded without having to sit down in the plane after you get to the airport and input each and every waypoint in your flight plan. So that system, that Garmin Connect system, is super nice to have. Finally, just going to round out the panel and show you the rest of the features down here and just give you an idea of how easy it is to operate everything on the panel, because we, again, like I said, have all of these different indicators. Everything is written out exactly what it is. Your switch for your panel dimmer. These are your gear lights, like I mentioned. If you can see over here, you've got the gear selector down on this side. If you can see that. So you've got that. You pull it up, and then it's going to show your gear in transit when it's moving, and then these lights will go off. Once the gear is up, then you know the gear is up and locked. If for some reason we have anything going on with these, the gear unsafe light will pop up when it's trying to transit, and you know to put the gear selector back down. But these three buttons, like I mentioned, the three green lights, that's what we're looking for, because each one shows, and if you have an issue in flight, you know which one is having the issue automatically. Very nice feature to have. Just kind of rounding out, we've obviously got our throttle and our prop and our mixture controls right here. These are kind of the nice version of them, being able to go with these kind of selectors as opposed to the push-in style. Up here's all of our switches. So we've got the battery and the radio on right now, fuel pump, the pitot heat, your anti-collision lights, nav lights, landing lights, and pulse lights are all right there. This is your alternate air selector, so you do have an alternate air option available. And then all of your circuit breakers very clearly labeled on what they are so that you know if you have something that you need to pull out in flight. And of course your autopilot one has the nice ring around it, so very easy to identify. Any issues with the autopilot, pop a breaker out, you know it's shut off right away. This is your cabin heat and your cabin defrost. And then of course down here, the front microphone and headset input. We do have a push or a microphone down here for being able to transmit handheld, but you don't really need it because both the co-pilot and the pilot side have push-to-talk options on the yoke. This is your autopilot disconnect, and then this here, when you do have autopilot on, it'll disconnect the autopilot temporarily, the altitude, if you do your trim up and down switch as well. So the panel being as integrated as it is makes it so simple for a pilot to be able to get in and just start flying it. It makes a very low pilot workload because you're not dialing in one thing, having to update it on a second thing, update it on a third thing. You put it in one and it just populates across the board, which makes it very easy for a pilot to use.
So obviously the panel of this particular Piper is completely updated, but for comparison, this is an original Aero panel layout. And I like how this is laid out when you see that all of the 6-pack gauges nicely oriented for scanning, and then the CDI and VOR to the right. Then you've got your engine and performance gauges on the pilot side and straight in front of the view for the pilot, with the center stack having the navcom, radios, transponder, and then obviously on the right side there's a little bit of space left for upgrades. The throttle quadrant on this does feel a little bit crowded, like there's just not enough space between the controls, but overall the Aero had an easy to use, convenient panel straight from the factory. The Piper Arrow has a very decent useful load of 1,120 pounds, and this obviously varies for each plane depending on how it's equipped and upgraded. The fuel capacity is 48 gallons and burns about 9 to 10 gallons per hour. The plane has a very short takeoff and landing distance, so you can use it on almost any runway. The service ceiling is actually 15,000 feet. Now remember that these numbers are all at full gross, and so they're even better with lower weight. The range is actually about 862 nautical miles with no reserve, and the plane can cruise at about 141 knots at 75% power, although normally you're going to see about 130 to 135 knots. Now when you compare the 180 horsepower to the 200 horsepower model, you can see that there are some improvements. The 200 horsepower model can fly a few knots faster, but it burns more fuel in doing so, so has a shorter range. And it does have a higher service ceiling, but there's just not a significant difference that I can see. Here's the comparison of the Piper Arrow 180 alongside a Mooney M20C and Cessna 177RG in regards to performance. We've marked in green which airplane leads each category. Now remember that the Cardinal RG has a more powerful 200 horsepower engine, but as you can see, all three are very good airplanes. The Mooney M20C overall dominates in performance. It has a lower fuel burn, can fly faster with a higher service ceiling and a longer range. The Aero, on the other hand, has a higher useful load than the Mooney and a lower stall speed. And then the Cardinal RG actually has the highest useful load and lowest stall speed. But for many pilots, it's not just the performance that matters. And I think that the reason the Aero is a popular plane is that it's an easy plane to fly and an easy plane to land.
Alright, so we've got all of our gauges over here. All of this stuff is off because our radio is off. So we're going to be watching our fuel flow in gallons per hour, the PSI, and the oil PSI are the three gauges we want to watch during our startup procedure. So startup includes, let's make sure we're holding our brakes. We'll push the fuel pump on. We want to advance the mixture until we see our PSI go up and our fuel gallons per hour go up, our fuel PSI. Then we'll pull that back, make sure that our throttle is cracked just a little bit. Then we're going to go ahead and we're going to turn it over. The first things after initial start,
RPMs 800, oil pressure in the green, and then we can adjust our RPMs from there for our idling and getting ready for taxi. This engine shouldn't be run at a long period of time at the low RPMs. So you can run it at about 1500 if you're going to be waiting, if you're holding short, if you're waiting for clearance, anything like that, extended period of time. Run it at about 1500 RPM while you're sitting on the ground waiting. It helps avoid fouling out your spark plugs if you keep it at too low of an RPM for too long.
Traffic holding short at start. I'm just getting ready to enter the downwind. You got time to go if you're ready.
Thanks. We'll be doing our run up here, so we'll hold off until you've landed. Stark County.
Roger that.
All right, so we're going to get our run up in. So fuel pump is going to go back on. We're going to push our mixture up to a full rich. We want to push our throttle up to 2300 RPM. Make sure we're holding our brakes nice and tight. Get it up to a high RPM setting here. Once we get up to 23, a little bit sensitive with my left hand. Give me 1 second. All right, so at 2300 RPM, we want to switch over right magneto, look at our RPM drop. Left magneto, look at our RPM drop. Those look good. Come over here, we want to feather out our prop, so we're going to go all the way down. And we're checking, we're doing that, we're checking obviously our RPM and our oil pressure, so we can do that a couple of times since it's the first start of the day. So that looks good, oil pressure, everything else looks good. Got our CHTs, AGTs, click on here, you've got our volts and our amps are showing, the electrical is looking good, so we'll be good there. We can go ahead, and the other thing we want to do is we switch our fuel pump off, just to make sure that stays running. That means that our
231 Key Lima, left base runway 36, Stark County.
We switch the fuel pump off. Once while we're doing that, we can make sure that we actually are running our engine-driven fuel pump without any problems. Then we're going to go ahead and pull back since we're going to hold off here for this landing traffic.
Take a look at the Mooney landing. Unlike the Aero, the Mooney demands a precise approach speed in order to land properly. Takeoff is just smooth acceleration with heavy right rudder to compensate for the yaw, and you just hold the nose up, rotate at 60, and let the airplane fly itself. Here's an outside view of the takeoff. As you can see, the Aero needs very little runway to take off. Then we go ahead and retract the gear once we have no usable runway left to land. Now let's take a look at this comparison of an Aero and a Cherokee taking off. The best rate of climb for the Aero is at 87 knots, and Piper recommends not to lean below 5,000 feet. But when we have a cruise climb setting, we do lean the mixture out since we've got a digital engine monitor and can closely monitor the engine temperatures. And only us GA pilots get to see these great views. We even had to take a right 360 here just to get behind another plane.
Different adjustments on the vertical speed, things like that. Obviously right now we're at 4620, so we will want to adjust ourselves down a little bit here, get back to the 45. So we've got a little scroll wheel here on the autopilot that's letting us drop it down. You can see a couple hundred feet a minute that we're going down, so we can let it drop down that. You can also adjust your vertical speed by using a vertical speed indicator as well as your indicated airspeed. You can climb out on an indicated airspeed if you want to, or descend on it, but this is just a very light adjustment in flight, so we're just using the up and down on here. Looks like we've captured our track. We're heading straight to the field. You can also go in, you load in approaches. If you know you're going to be flying an instrument approach, whatever it is, get everything set up in here, load it in, and let it fly the approach. So lots of different options on it that way. Get leveled off here, about 4,500. Back one notch.
10 Tango, how long are you saying at 10-5?
It looks like we've got another bank of clouds up here, so we'll be up here for a little while longer. 10 Tango.
Roger.
Just advise if you are going to change altitudes at all.
3005, and we'll advise any altitude changes. 10 Tango. Chicago Center, Aero 10 Tango. We may need to climb up to 11,000 to clear some clouds in front of us.
Oh, perfect. I love that. No traffic, but yeah, thanks for the heads up.
You're welcome. 10 Tango.
Descending from high altitudes is fairly smooth, and according to Lycoming engineers, you can't shock cool these engines, but we do pull the power back gradually in the descent just to manage the airspeed and power gain. Now we usually put the gear down abeam the numbers in the pattern, or at about 3 miles out if we're on a straight-in final, just based on the conditions. The gear is going to slow the plane down and get it ready for landing. The Aero has a very stable approach, especially when we use the full flaps on landing.
Geared, nose gears, everything's down, set, ready to go.
10 degrees.
We're going to throw 10 degrees of flap, so grab our flap bar, pull it up until it locks in the first notch. That's 10 degrees. We're within our white arc for that. Stark County traffic, Aero 10 Tango, turning base, runway 36, Stark County. That one that we flew past just a few minutes ago is coming in behind us for the landing, so keep our radio calls active since we've got active traffic in the pattern. Our prop needs to be at 2600 RPM ready for the go around, so that's one of the steps we're checking. Our mixture already was full rich. Pull the power down. It's almost just above the stall is what you want to settle down. And you want to catch the main gear first, and then pull that nose wheel off as much as possible.
Here's an outside view of the landing. You can see how nice the landing is and just how little it takes on the runway.
Let it slow down, and then one of the other things you want to do is you want to make sure that you put those flaps down and out as soon as possible before you do your braking. It helps with the control of the plane, but you can see it stops really quick, really short distance. Didn't even use a third of the runway to get down and stopped.
Here's a comparison of the Aero and Cherokee landing. I think the Cherokee was a student pilot that was using a little higher speeds, but they do land very similar.
I want to thank you for taking the time to watch our video today. We always ask that you like the video, subscribe to our channel if you want to watch more videos like this in the future, and of course any questions, comments, leave them down in the section below. We always do our best to answer them for you.